Hello, and welcome to the Courage to Learn. My name is Lisa Langell. I'm a wildlife photographer who loves to support and help other photographers as they grow and appreciate the art and challenge sometimes of wildlife photography. I want to share with you today one of our readers' images that she's planning on preparing for an upcoming wildlife photography contest. This is a reader from Canada by the name of Mandy, and I really appreciate Mandy's solicitation of her images to me to review and critique. As a photographer, it's always an honor to be able to see someone else's work and be able to share my thoughts about the quality of that work and also the emotional quality, not just technical quality, of what that image does for me. Mandy really enjoys nature photography. She's just getting started. She has a limited budget. She's working with new equipment, and so that presented her with some challenges and opportunities. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Mandy is working to advance her skills, and one of my favorite things about Mandy when I've talked with her is that she has a real passion for learning and growing. I think that's one of the keys to any successful photographer is when you really have a passion for what you're doing, but you're open to learning new things. You're not intimidated by that. Your ego doesn't get in the way of that. And that, to me, offers the most opportunity for advancement. So Mandy, right off the bat, you have some real qualities and strengths in your ability as a photographer to grow and master what you're doing. So I appreciate that so much. Mandy's going to be entering her first wildlife photography contest. Now, I don't know many details about this contest, so I'm going to be pointing out some things as we go along about entries into photography contests. Now, Mandy has 4 different images that you can see here that she's entering. We've got a black and white of a barn, we have a peacock, an eagle, and some geese. Now, as we work with Mandy's images, I'm going to point out some real basic strengths and areas of weakness in each of the images so that she knows kind of what we're looking for as judges. And then also, I want to pick one of the images to spend more time on that seems to have the most potential for the contest. Okay, so first of all, just for my newer viewers, some things that I talk about in my critiques are basics about composition, certain strengths to the image, and what I call also considerations. These may be weaknesses or other areas of the image that could be improved, but I say considerations because wildlife photography is certainly a science, but it's also an art. And as we know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Some things that I might like or dislike, others may have opposite opinions about. So these are just things for considerations, not necessarily things that I see as absolutes, as strengths or flaws in an image. Lastly, I'll talk briefly about the Photoshop part where appropriate, and then we'll talk about submission. So first, we have an eagle here. Now, a couple things, and I'm going to be quick about this, but for composition, I love that we have an angle here, a diagonal, where the eye comes in, goes across the image on a diagonal, and over here. Diagonals work really well for photography, especially in vertical or horizontal compositions. I like that. I also like that your eyes are in focus here, that the bird is facing you. It's more interesting than if it was facing away or facing sideways, at least in this particular composition. I love that you've shot it clear. It's sharp. It's not blurry. But a couple things that we can improve upon is I feel like I need a little more headroom for this bird. Feel like he's sitting in a vehicle or in a room with a ceiling that's too low. So if you were to recompose this, either whether you cropped it in post-processing or were shooting it out of your camera this way, I would actually recompose, whether you step back a few feet or leave a little bit more room in the head. I'd like to at least see double what you've given here, if not maybe triple what you've given here, just to give the bird a little bit of space to breathe. I love that you shoot tight images, and typically the closer the better in wildlife photography in many circumstances, but in this case I feel like it's a little bit too close of a crop. So maybe if you have the opportunity to reshoot, do that. You've also chopped off a few tail feathers here, and that detracts a little bit, in my personal opinion, from the image. Back to some good things. I love that you have 2 eyes that are clearly lit, clearly in focus, and you've even caught catch lights in these eyes, which are the light spots in the eyes. Good job on that. I love that this area is properly exposed. We can see the detail in the feather. We've got nice light here. There's not a lot of modeling here as far as, maybe dappling from leaves or trees that gets in the way. Sometimes you see that. I see a little bit of a shadow here that might be from a branch, but other than that, I don't see heavy shadows or blotchiness that sometimes you get when you're photographing underneath a tree or something like that. I think, though, that you may have shot this bird in full sun in the middle of the day. And I say that because I can see a definite shadow coming straight down on this bird from the beak. And we see real high highlights or specularity in the top of this image on the head. That tells me it was probably shot midday. And that can give you an extra challenging scenario for shooting eagles. We get high contrast, and that can be difficult. As a result, we have some overblown highlights in the area of the neck here, where this is 100% white. I also have in the underbelly of the bird and in the tail feathers and in some of these wings here 100% black. I've lost detail here. I can't see it as a viewer, and I want to see it. So shooting maybe later in the day or early in the morning or under slight cloud cover or waiting for the bird to move to a perch that is under, maybe an overhang or a canopy, that will give you the opportunity to reduce that contrast and bring back some of that detail. Certainly you can change your ISO, shutter speed, aperture. However, because of the high contrast scenario of dark feathers against light feathers, midday light really poses challenges to photographers shooting high contrast animals. So coming back if you can, it looks like this bird's in captivity, will give you a little bit better chance to get a better image. So try again if you can. Love the way you've shot it as far as the composition goes, but just leave a little more room in the head and maybe reduce that contrast. Another little thing here, I love they actually caught the whole feet here, but you got a little bit of an overexposed piece here. And this band, which tells me this bird's probably in captivity, though not always. Certainly birds are banded in the wild, and you can photograph those as well. But I'm guessing, because this looks like maybe a fence in the background, that this bird was in captivity. This band is awfully bright, and it really detracts. Your eye tends to go right to white things in images, all white or really dark things. And so my eye first goes here, and then it goes here. And I really keep getting distracted by this lightness. So maybe in post-processing, just reduce the brightness of this band. Sometimes you can clone it out altogether. In this case, I don't see enough of the other piece of the leg or the feathers here where we could borrow from that to clone it, but you may have some success. But anyway, those are some things that I find as strengths and relative weaknesses for this image that I think if you have the opportunity to reshoot, you could improve upon with this bird. All right, so one other thing that I want to mention when you're submitting to competitions for birds, be careful with the rules and guidelines of the competition that you can shoot animals and submit images of animals taken in captivity. Also make sure, depending on the rights and licensing that you agree to when you submit an image to a contest, that they're not going to be republishing it for profit or in some other way that conflicts with the policies of the organization at which you shot the photo. For example, many wildlife rehab facilities have federal legislation that prevents people from taking pictures of animals for profit. And so if you or some other organization could profit from this image, it might be in violation not only with local policies for that business, but also sometimes state or federal laws regarding that. Another thing as well, certain photo contests will or will not allow photos of animals in captivity. So if this was one shot in captivity, and I don't know if it is or not, but if it is, you may want to check the rules to make sure that that's acceptable. Lastly, check with the rules for your contest regarding how much you can edit an image. Certain contests will allow liberal editing. You can add or delete elements of the image. You can crop. You can do all kinds of things. Others are very restrictive about the editing that you can do, and sometimes only limit it to light adjustments with color or exposure, and not necessarily allow you to add in or remove elements. So just be conscientious of that as you're submitting. Lastly, one thing that I notice here with your image is I see this halo effect around the bird. It's light or darker here. You've done a good job of isolating the subject from the background. You have a real blurred background here. And I believe with the equipment you were using, you said you shot it at f8. That's difficult to get a blurred background on f8. So if this was naturally done, that's a good job that you were able to isolate the subject from the background. But I'm wondering if some elements with your glass, I know you said, you're longing for the, multi-$1,000 lenses, but you had to opt for a little less expensive lens at this point. I'm either wondering if some of that distortion is part of the glass and just the lower quality in the glass, or perhaps you did this in post-processing where you selected the image and then did an inverse selection where instead of putting a treatment to the bird itself. You did an inverse selection where you selected everything but the bird. And then it looks like maybe you did a Gaussian blur effect with it. If you did that, sometimes that Gaussian blur can also be the result of this halo. You can always go back in and erase some of that if you're doing it in layers and bring that back in. But it looks like in this case you're getting a halo effect due to either, again, lens distortion, or possibly if you did a Gaussian blur effect, you were getting a little bit of that as a result. Judges will pick up on that and notice that. You also have here in the shadows a little bit of this bluish color. I would see if you could desaturate that, because that's a little bit detracting from the overall image. But I think the biggest strengths that I see are your composition, though I'd leave a little bit more room up here, the clarity in the eyes, the catch lights in the eyes, and again, if the eyes aren't in focus, nothing else matters, most always in wildlife photography. So good job there. Composition as far as the diagonal line is nice. You exposed well here, but I worry a little bit about the overexposing here, underexposing here, and possibly this halo effect. Those are three concerns that I have, and the distraction of this band. I would correct those if you go to reshoot this image. Let's take a look at the next one. You have a peacock, beautiful peacock. In this particular case, my favorite things in this image are your diagonal line here. I love how this plays well in this image. It just balances this from this beautifully. I've got a little bit too much of a highlight here going on. I would like to be able to see, Mandy, if you could reshoot this to just reduce this, whether that means shooting on a slightly overcast day or early or late day. This is just right around 100% white. So for example, this color here is the same color as my page. I would like to see more detail there. I also am missing the catch light in this bird's eye. It looks like there's just a faint one, and I think you could bring that back in post-processing if you're allowed to do so. But I just feel it's a little bit lifeless. I'd like to see more of that catch light. I like that you got the face in focus, though. That's a really good thing. The eye is in focus. A lot of times people miss out on that. They get the focus on other areas, so good job. One thing I would also like to see is if you cropped this. So if we put a grid around this image and we cropped it so that this face here is in the upper quadrant. If you drew a tic-tac-toe grid across this and did it in thirds, you'd see that this face would now be in the upper quadrant. You don't lose a lot. I mean, you lose a little bit of the plumage, but it just zeroes your eye in a better way to this overall image and balances it out. I would like to maybe see a little bit better cropping on that for composition purposes and rules of thirds. Okay, your next image is of a family of geese, and I love that you caught a moment here. I think it's brilliant when we look for wildlife that actually has moments, when we photograph those moments that really tell a story. I think it's so much more beautiful than just simply a documentation shot or a portrait. But in this case, there's some strengths here and some areas I think you can improve upon. Now, it's difficult to go and reshoot wildlife. You know, they're usually only there for a moment and then they're gone. But in the case of families with nests or young broods, they typically hang out in a certain area. So my guess is if this was a recent image, you could go back and get it again. Maybe a different situation, but you could find the family again and shoot that family. So some things that I notice here that I like that you have catch lights in these eyes. I like that. I typically like twos, if anything. If you see, animals in pairs, it's usually more interesting than just one. So I like that you have the family here. I like the repetition here of the faces and then the back feathers of these birds. I think that's beautiful. I love that you have the family here and you've got nice lines. My eye kind of wants to go to their eyes first and then kind of come down to the family. But again, we're noticing it looks like this was taken in midday, and typically I can tell that because I've got dark shadows directly under the wings, and it looks like this brightness is on the head, the beak, and these cheeks of the Canada geese. I would go back and reshoot this later in the day if possible. You'll get side light, which will give you more even light and reduce that contrast. You'll also usually have softer light, so later in the day or early morning, or if you can do it on a day that's slightly overcast, maybe high thin clouds, or something to that effect, so that you can soften that contrast, because that's really posing a problem here, and I think that judges in your contest will notice that. So you've got some highlights here, a little bit over here, and then even a little bit in the bird here that just kind of distract from the overall image and we lose some detail there. Again, some things that I like, again, your composition is done well. I like that you didn't put the shoreline right in the middle of the picture. A lot of times people do that. I like that you have here, it's clear. These birds are all in focus, which is difficult to do sometimes. But I would definitely try to play with this maybe a little later in the day or early morning to get some better light. Here again is that rule of thirds. One last thing that I would suggest is maybe just crop this image so these faces are more in line with this quadrant. It's not far off, but I would just maybe try to do a little better job of that. But again, it's not far off. It's not horrible, but might just help you just a hair. I would also leave a little bit more room with these tail feathers. If you were to print it and put it in a mat or a frame, these tail feathers are going to touch the edge of that, and that can sometimes be distracting. So if for some reason you cropped this from the original image, I would leave more room. If this is out of the camera this way, I might try to go back and reshoot to see if you can just leave a hair more room. I love that you're tight and close with your images, but we got to watch out for the ends of the bird so they don't touch the edge of the picture. Okay, your last image is of a barn here. I love this barn. It's a really unusual barn with the big roof and very low walls. I just think it's a pretty barn, and I love the texture. I know you live in northern Canada in the plains, and I think it's neat that you're capturing some things locally to you. Some things that I love. I love the lines here. I love this actual line of grass down here really works. As opposed to just having a boring old foreground, adding this extra layer really adds an element. It ties in with these lighter colors in the back. You've got lots of layers, and I think that's really beautiful. One thing I would do is I would try to photograph this image again when the sun is peeking through this door. Right now I have a dark door. I can't see anything inside here, and I want to. This is a big, heavy element and a focal point in the image. My eye, if I were a viewer looking at this piece of art, I want to go inside, but I don't want to go inside a pitch black barn. I want to at least know there's some light in there, and I want to kind of get a hint at what I might experience if I walk inside. So if you could reshoot when the sun's in a little better position, if this is local to you, this building, I would go and shoot when the sun is more likely to come inside these doors and just give you a hint of what's inside that barn. It really helps tell a story. We're close to overexposing these back areas here. It's not horrible, and it adds, some light and shade, but we're close. We're kind of losing some detail, and I might want to just know a little bit more about what this is other than a gray area. Part of that's going to be your depth of field too, but I see you have, you shot probably, at maybe f11 or f16 or so to get all of this in focus from your front to the back, maybe even higher than that for your aperture. So I just feel like this got a little bit lost in the detail, and I might want to see more of some kind of detail. This roof is also almost on the verge of being overexposed. We could probably bring some of that back in Photoshop by either doing a layer and doing an overlay layer and painting with a low opacity of black and just bringing back that color, or you could burn in mid-levels or shadows, and that might also help you bring back a little bit of that roof. I would love to see that roof. I think it's one of the most interesting details of this image, because when you think about it, whoever built this barn spent a lot of time and was at high risk of falling, laying all those shingles, especially on the side. So I think it's just a neat opportunity to bring that back, and it just wants me to linger in that image a little bit longer if I could see more details in that barn. I like that you compose this in such a way that your horizon doesn't completely bisect the image in half. It looks like this was photographed maybe on a slight hill. This area of land is higher than this one. If that's the case, great. If not, it could be that your image was taken slightly crooked. I'm not sure, because I look at this grass down here and this looks pretty level, but I look at this here and it feels like it's a little bit on a tilt. Because I can't clearly tell it's a hill, you may want to look at cropping your image in such a way that this horizon looks more level. Play with it and see if you like it, because I do like the fact that this grass is level here, but I'm just not quite sure what's happening here, if this is a hill or not. So you might want to think about that, but good job in not putting it right in the middle of your image. So if I put my rule of thirds grid up on the top here, I can see that part of this image falls right in that lower grid for that horizon. That's great. But you see how much higher this one is. I think it's because it's on a hill. But seeing how these doors are not perfectly level, if you look at my straight up and down line here, and then you look at these doors look a little bit slanted. This is not perfectly vertical. Could be some lens distortion going on because this looks vertical. this looks fairly vertical. It might be that the barn is a little tilted. It's, it's old. It might be just teetering a little bit. But those are some things that make me feel like, if you just turned that image a little bit and brought this side of the image up, it might play better in viewing it. So give it a go. See what you like about that. Okay, so the 4 images that you sent me, I think the 2 that have the most potential are the barn and the peacock. It's not that the others aren't nice, but the peacock has the least amount of high contrast, overblown, or underexposed components of it. I also really appreciate the composition, the clarity, and I think you can crop it to even put it more in that rule of thirds like we talked before. I also think that the barn is really nice. If you have the opportunity to go and reshoot it, you might want to try to see if you can get more light in that inside part of the barn. I also want to make sure that you keep some of these really interesting layers that you have here. I love that you've got this light and then dark and a darker and light and dark, and you just get these layers that go back and back and back in the image. Those are really powerful elements of a landscape. So I really appreciate that you do that. And in fact, maybe you even want to add a little bit more in that image. If you happen to shoot again, see if you could get a few clouds in the sky. That can also add some interest as well. Though again, these are personal preferences, and sometimes the stark vastness of a sky, especially in your black and white, works really well. So personal preference, but I would just work a little bit on the exposure on that. Other than that, I think you're doing a great job. I wish you well with your first contest, and thank you so much for giving me the honor to give you feedback about your images. I so appreciate your willingness to learn, Mandy, and I look forward to keeping in touch for a long time. Have a wonderful day, and thanks again. Take care, and good luck.